Does your house belong to you? Or if you are not using it, can someone just come in, squat for a period of time, and then claim that they have a right to be there? This so-called squatter scam is something that's happening around the country. There's even videos telling people how to go in and take over an empty house. That was never how the law was supposed to work. And in Florida, we are going to take action today to end this scam and to protect the private property rights of our homeowners.
Even when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is doing something I agree with, I can't help but point out the fact that, man, the dude is like a massive dweeb. He's so awkward. He has so much difficulty talking to the public. I don't know what that's all about, but nonetheless, DeSantis has signed legislation to essentially close certain loopholes that allow for squatters to occupy homes belonging to others. Now, the conversation around squatters and squatters' rights has actually blown up over the past few weeks, especially after some reports that were particularly egregious. One of those reports we shared with you, it involved a homeowner who was dealing with squatters, and after she managed to get the squatters out and she immediately changed the locks, cops showed up and arrested her because she's supposed to go through a nearly 2-year eviction process when it comes to people who are literally trying to steal her property. Absolutely egregious. Now, DeSantis cited that as one of the reasons why he signed this new legislation in a press conference just yesterday.
Changed the locks to get them out, and the state of New York arrested her instead of the squatters. Just a few days ago, 2 squatters in New York City allegedly murdered the property owner when she confronted them for being in her apartment illegally. In fact, we even have illegal aliens taking to social media, instructing other foreigners how to come into this country and commandeer property. They have gotten involved in this. Well, today in the state of Florida, we say very simply, what passes muster in New York and California is not passing muster here. You are not going to be able to commandeer somebody's private property and expect to get away with it. We are in the state of Florida ending the squatter scam once and for all.
Okay, so before we get to the specific details about the legislation that he just signed in the state of Florida, legislation that I agree with, I'm gonna be clear about that. I do want to address some of the stuff that he referenced in that statement, because he talked about someone who was instructing people on how to become successful squatters. And what he was referencing was something that happened earlier this week. So the Martin County Sheriff issued an alert to all homeowners to be on the lookout for possible squatters after someone on TikTok released the video that you're about to watch last week.
Mi gente, he pensado invadir una casa en United States, ya que me enteré que existe una ley que dice que si una casa no está habitada, podemos expropiarla. Capichi, muchachos. Aquí en United States también se aplica la de invasión de terreno. Y creo que ese será mi próximo negocio. Invadir casas abandonadas. Y como dice el dicho, papi, hay que buscar la vuelta. Y la vuelta ahorita mismo es invadir casas. La ley dice que las casas abandonadas, deterioradas y que esté en mal estado, podemos llegar y repararlas, vivir en ellas y si podemos venderla.
So this guy's a piece of crap for a number of reasons, okay? He's an attention whore on social media, okay? He does this kind of garbage for attention, and while he's doing it, he feeds into fear-mongering about migrants in this country and pushes this ridiculous narrative that the squatters happen to be undocumented immigrants, which again, there's no evidence to that, and most of the squatters that I've seen happen to be Americans who are trying to essentially steal property from their rightful owners. But if you're wondering who this guy is, his name is Lionel Moreno. He appears to live in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He's a Venezuelan national. And he said in a recent video that under US law, if a house is not inhabited, it we can seize it, right? And so he has around 500,000 followers on TikTok, and that video alone, as of this morning, drew in 3.9 million views. Moreno illegally entered the United States at Eagle Pass, Texas, in early 2022. This guy is so dumb. You're so dumb. Now ICE is looking for him. Like, he made a name for himself. Congratulations, you idiot. All right. So that was who Ron DeSantis was referencing in his statement. I don't want to spend too much time on this guy or the garbage that he's espousing here, but I do want to say that his account was suspended on TikTok after Peter Doocy questioned White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on the matter, asking if Biden would take action.
There is a Venezuelan migrant with 500,000 followers on TikTok who is telling border crossers they can live in empty houses in this country. Would President Biden support a law that would make that kind of squatting illegal?
I have not seen that TikTok video, so I can't comment on that.
A lot of mainstream media don't give you honest news. We do. You know why? Because of you. Paid membership on YouTube makes all the difference. Hit the join button below and you become the hero that sustains us.
Now, while the account was suspended, Martin County Sheriff William Snyder is still nervous about any possible ripple effects from the video, and is asking residents to be on the lookout, especially if you have neighbors who might be out of town, on vacation. That's usually when squatters will take advantage of the opportunity to break into a home. But let's pivot back to DeSantis, because I think that's the important story here. What he's trying to do, what the legislators in a bipartisan bill accomplished in Florida, something that I think should be accomplished in other states as well, where we are seeing this issue play out. So let's hear more about HB 621.
We have not had the same type of issues here as you've seen in California or New York. Nevertheless, our laws were really geared towards this not necessarily being a fad. This idea of squatting, when you had the old West and people would settle the West, you'd show up, there'd be a place, so people would settle, they'd create a community. Well, to have someone come 7, 8 years later and say they own the property after all this, you understood why that was done in that way. That was never intended to empower somebody to just invade some residential subdivision and illegally occupy somebody's private residence. So what we're doing today is recognizing that, but I think more importantly, providing very swift remedies, because what the squatters know is even when they're in the wrong, it's a massive process many times before they can be evicted. And a lot of times the process is very expensive. And so we don't want the law to have the thumb on the scale in favor of people that are violating the law.
I again, largely agree with what DeSantis said there. And there's a reason why squatters' rights exist. It's just that those laws tend to be pretty antiquated. It had to do with a time when there would be abandoned homes, for instance. And if someone finds an abandoned home and they settle there and there's no harm, no foul, that's totally fine. But what we're addressing here and what DeSantis and the legislature in Florida, in a bipartisan way, are trying to do is to protect actual property owners from being victimized by this. And so for a few more details that I'll share with you, under HB 621, a property owner can request law enforcement to immediately remove a squatter from their property if the following conditions are met. The individual has unlawfully entered and remains on the property. The individual has been directed to leave the property by the owner but has not done so, and the individual is not a current or former tenant in a legal dispute. HB 621 also creates some pretty harsh penalties for those engaged in squatting and for those who encourage squatting and to teach others how to do it. The bill makes it a first-degree misdemeanor for making a false statement in writing to obtain real property, or for knowingly and willfully presenting a falsified document conveying property rights. That's actually very common with squatters, so they'll just draft up a fraudulent lease agreement and say, no, I'm the renter, here's the lease agreement. If they're caught doing that, there will be penalties for it. A second-degree felony for any person who unlawfully occupies or trespasses in a residential dwelling and who intentionally causes $1,000 or more in damages. One of these squatter stories that we shared details about on this show happened in New York, where this young guy in his 30s has decided to squat in a property that was purchased by a retired couple who planned to not only retire there, but to take care of their adult son who has Down syndrome. And what this guy is also doing, in addition to squatting on that property, is he like opens the windows and like blasts the AC. And the property owners have no choice but to continue paying the utilities, because the second they stop paying the utilities, what typically ends up happening is the squatters will hit up the utility companies and change the billing to their name. And then they use that as documentation proving that it's their property. And so it's just a terrible situation, incredibly costly and time consuming for the legit property owners. And so I love that that issue was also addressed in this legislation. Also, the legislation makes it a first-degree felony for knowingly advertising the sale or rent of a residential property without legal authority or ownership. I find so far nothing wrong with this legislation. There might be unintended consequences, and we'll address that if that arises. But I am impressed with the speed in which DeSantis did something about this. We're seeing stories out of New York and California where lawmakers are just sitting on their asses and doing nothing about it. And I think it's wrong. I think that they shouldn't just sit around and do nothing as these stories continue to flood the press. But I also want to note, we don't know how widespread squatting really is. Judd Legum, in his Substack Popular Info, addressed how there is really no organization keeping track of how widespread squatting is. And so I don't want to treat this as if it's a widespread issue, because we don't know how widespread it is. But nonetheless, for the few who might be victimized by this, there should be legal protections so they're not victimized by this. And I'm glad to see that Florida did something right in response to this issue.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.